Hello, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Dr. Elena Seranova, and today is a very special episode. We have Dr. Scott Sherr with us today. So we're going to talk about all things longevity, methylene blue, supplements, and so on. So it will be a very interesting episode. So like and subscribe and stay tuned for an amazing episode with Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott, welcome.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Elena.
Yeah, we can start with a little introduction from yourself. So, why don't you share with us your journey so far? What brought you here? How did you start the company? How did you get involved with supplements and so on?
It can be a long story or a short story, I guess. My name is Dr. Scott Sherr. I'm an internal medicine physician. I grew up the son of a chiropractor, though, so very out of the box. I went to medical school with the idea of learning how to bridge the worlds between conventional and alternative medicine. And in my training, I was obviously tantalized by a lot of the money you could make as a medical provider in the conventional world, but I really knew that I wanted to find a way to kind of create an integrative practice. And so I gravitated towards something called hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which was a modality that I found could be used both in and outside of the conventional system. And then over about a decade, I created a hyperbaric practice with an integrative mindset, online consulting practice after being a medical director of multiple facilities in the Bay Area in Northern California, where I lived for many years, and then just purely online consulting, working with people all over the world. But the practice really wasn't just about hyperbaric medicine. It really was about creating an integrative idea and understanding of how people could get healthy. And in 2017, I signed on to be the chief operating officer of a nonprofit called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. This was started by a colleague and mentor of mine. His name is Dr. Ted Atricoso. And Dr. Ted is a fantastic human. He's a very, very smart individual. He had created this framework that he called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, or Home Hope for short. And it was a perspective shift, looking at understanding foundational health, looking at biomarkers, things like something called metabolomics, for example, which looks at sort of baseline foundational ideas of how you can keep people healthy rather than treat disease or even the root cause of disease. And so that became the foundation of my hyperbaric clinical integrative practice. And then in 2020, we created a company called Troscriptions, right over here. That's a company that was developed as a result of wanting to help people right away or right now while they're on the longer path to optimizing their health, which many of us know in the practitioner space can take a long time. Even if you're a patient or somebody that works with a practitioner, you know that most of the time things don't happen overnight. You want to feel better tomorrow, but it can take over 6 months, a year longer to feel better. So what are the things you can do along the way to try to help yourself? And we created Troscriptions to help people right now with their energy, focus, sleep, immune system function, and more. So that's the short story right there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. So I found you on Instagram, and the reason why I invited you to the show was because I was very interested in methylene blue. It's a compound that I don't know much about. So I was hoping, we can kind of describe what it does, how it works, and, who can benefit from taking methylene blue.
Methylene blue has actually been around for a long time. It was first discovered back in the 1870s, actually. So a long time ago. It was a textile dye before it became a medicine. In 1897, it was the first drug that was registered with the FDA for malaria, actually, in 1897. And what's interesting about methylene blue is a long time ago. And it was actually it was actually called something very interesting called the magic bullet. And it was called the magic bullet because you could use methylene blue, this compound, at pretty high doses and kill pathogens and kill bugs, but you would actually not harm the human cells. And that was kind of the holy grail, as it were, because it was very difficult to find those kinds of drugs back in that time frame. Chemotherapy didn't exist. Even antimicrobials didn't exist. And so between 1897 and the 1950s, methylene blue was one of the primary antimicrobials available for human consumption. And so it was very, very commonly used in a lot of different forms as an antibacterial, an antifungal, an antiviral even. So even if you lived in a developing country in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, you might have had methylene blue lollipops, actually, because what they used to do is paint the back of the mouth with methylene blue when you had a viral infection. And it was actually very, very effective, interestingly enough. But the issue with methylene blue, and the reason why it became less exciting or less favored in the world of antimicrobials, was because number one, we had fancier drugs that came out in the 1950s, and number two, it also made your urine blue. So if you have methylene blue, it concentrates in your urine, and as a result of that, you urinate blue. So that's not always exciting for people. And at very, very high doses, it also makes your other secretions blue, even your tears blue. So not to say that you should
Oh,
be using those
wow.
kinds of high doses, but that's what can happen. So after the 1930s and 40s and kind of like early 1950s, methylene blue kind of had a different history. It sort of changed direction from an antimicrobial to being the first antipsychotic was actually derived from methylene blue, something called chlorpromazine. This is because methylene blue also has another attribute, which is it's a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which basically means it just increases the amount of norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin in the synapse in the brain. So it's actually been studied as a mood booster on its own, and there are studies on depression, bipolar, as well, showing that it can improve mood, as well as improve infections. And the third chapter for methylene blue was that it was actually being used and still is as something used in chemistry lab. This is where I first learned about it, because methylene blue can be used in chemistry lab to stain cells. What it really does is concentrates the blue pigment inside the mitochondria in the cell itself. And that's kind of like the fourth chapter of methylene blue, which is now we know that because it's concentrating in the mitochondria, it has fantastic capacity to enhance mitochondrial function. Mitochondria are the part of our cell that make energy, and we have a lot of mitochondria in our body, especially in our ovaries or testicles, depending on what you have, our brain, our heart, our liver, and our muscle tissue. And so if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you're going to have symptoms in those particular areas. And so we know that methylene blue, what it can do, which is really interesting, is not only enhance energy production and help compensate for areas of the mitochondria that may not be working very well, which 94% of the US population at least has some element of mitochondrial dysfunction, which is a huge number. But not only does it do that, but it also increases the capacity for detoxification, because it can work just like an antioxidant in your mitochondria. So picking up free electrons or free radicals. And then in addition, it can induce the production of your own body's antioxidant capacity as well. So at the moment, methylene blue is still on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications. It's used in medical practice. It's used to reverse things like cyanide poisoning, which I don't recommend anybody have, along with something called methemoglobinemia, which is when your red blood cells cannot carry oxygen. It's also used in medical procedures like transplant surgeries and others, where you're trying to look to make sure that you haven't had any disturbance of any of the organs when you're doing surgeries. And then on the other side of it, on the sort of the health and wellness, on my side of things, the way I use methylene blue is for performance, for endurance, but also for inflammation, for mitochondrial dysfunction, and everything that goes along with those.
Amazing. So yeah, I've heard a lot of athletes actually using methylene blue to boost their performance. And interestingly, there are different kind of products on the market, and your company seems to be having a very high quality of products and a special form as well. So how did you decide on the form specifically? Like, why did you decide to launch the product in this particular form? So maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah, so it's called a dosage form or a delivery method, whatever you want to call it. But we don't use capsules. We don't use tablets. We use something called a buccal troche. A buccal troche is really cool because or if you're in the UK, it's buccal, but most of the time we call it buccal. Or troche, but buccal troche is how we say it. So troche is a dissolvable lozenge. It's kind of a square, and it's scored, so it has like a cross in the middle of it. So you can easily divide it into a quarter, half, or full. So there's a couple different reasons why troches are great. Number one is that I just mentioned it's titratable, so you can take a quarter, a half, or a full. And depending on the person, some people are very sensitive. I know I am typically to like capsules, and I often have to like break open the capsule and like take half of it and like pour it in my water or something like that. And it's just a pain in the ass. And so it's nice to be able to have easily titratable products where you can take the milligram dosage and cut it up to very small pieces if you need to. Usually it's a quarter at the minimum, but some people even take an eighth or sometimes even a 16th if you're getting crazy. So depending on what you really need to do. So that's one thing that's nice about it. The other thing about troches that's very nice is that it can go between your upper cheek and gum because it's called a buccal troche. The nice thing about buccal delivery, which is between your upper cheek and gum, is that it's highly vascular up here and it dissolves very quickly. So within about 15 to 30 minutes, you'll start feeling the effects of the troche, which is fantastic. Depending especially on what's going on while you're taking the troche. If you're taking it from a brain-related issue, then you're going to feel it within 15 to 30 minutes. That's pretty awesome. The third thing that's really nice about a buccal troche is that it bypasses what's called first pass metabolism in your liver, which typically means that you're digesting things and you're breaking them down and you're decreasing the bioavailability or the active nature of the compound as a result of digestion. So that's really nice because we want to have as much get into the system as possible. Like a good example I always talk about something like NAC or N-acetylcysteine, which is a common antioxidant that people will take. It has about a 10% bioavailability. So if you swallow NAC, you get about 10% of the dose. Now, if you use our buccal troches, you're going to get 100% of the amount of that ingredient while you're using the troche, which is fantastic. But there's a caveat to all of this, or there's an addition, an and here, is that Methylene Blue can be used as a buccal troche. So we have a couple different products, one called Just Blue, that's our lower strength, one called Tro Plus Blue, which is our higher strength for practitioners only, pure methylene blue. Pure methylene blue is 100% bioavailable. So you can take it as a buccal troche or you can swallow it and it's going to work just as well. It's just going to be slower. The nice thing about that is that if you take methylene blue in the mouth, your mouth is going to be quite blue. And depending on how much methylene blue you take, it could be blue for a couple hours or it can be blue for a couple days. If you take 50 milligrams of methylene blue in your mouth, it will be blue for a couple days. So I usually don't recommend that. The only reason I recommend taking methylene blue in the mouth, pure methylene blue, is if you have a lot of cognitive issues, if you're having issues with brain fog, concentration, difficulty remembering, verbal fluidity, it can be really nice to take it in the mouth because it can help you in that capacity because it's just going to be faster. But in general, the buccal troche, we use it for all of our other products, especially combination products, because we know that it's going to work faster, that it's going to be more bioavailable, and you have the titration capacity. Those are the three major improvements or the three major reasons why buccal troches are pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. So a couple of things here. So what else does it contain? So when do you take it? Because there are so many forms of different supplements out there. And, you know, I'm always advocating for taking products that are as pure as possible. For example,
Sure.
you know, those vitamin gummies that are just disgusting and have so many excipients in them. That would be my first question with regards to what else does it contain? And also, there are different kind of brands of methylene blue out there. And actually, a friend of mine who's an amateur athlete told me that she took one, which was not from your brand. It was some other brand. I think it was a pill. And then she actually felt tired because, you know, it kind of gave her some sort of a side effect, basically, that was the opposite of what she was hoping for. So my question here is that, is it actually like the brand that didn't have a clear product, or if there is a possibility of the methylene blue somehow affecting mitochondria in a different way? Because, for example, with other supplements, such as, let's say, calcium ACG, like they can affect, they can actually block the ATP synthase when you take it, calcium alpha ketoglutarate. So they can make you tired because of it. So I was wondering, where does methylene blue stands on this?
That's a great question. So endurance in general, so the reason why methylene blue can improve endurance, improve performance, is because it can rev up energy production in the mitochondria. Especially what's interesting about sort of what we would call aerobic work, where you're working for a long period of time and trying to increase your aerobic capacity, is that methylene blue can act just like oxygen in the mitochondria and become what's called the final electron acceptor for the electrons. Instead of that usually being oxygen, if you have less around, methylene blue can do that. So that's a pretty fantastic capacity. And I have a couple of colleagues that are working on this specifically, able to keep their elevated heart rates up for longer as a result of using methylene blue. But what you're talking about here is a little bit more nuanced in the sense that when you have somebody that already has inflammation in the system, if they already have oxidative load, if they already have mitochondrial dysfunction, even if they are elite athletes, many of these athletes are, even many non-elite athletes are overtraining. And if you're overtraining, you're also going to have more reactive oxygen species, oxidative stress in the mitochondria hanging around. And so what can happen is that if you give too much methylene blue too quickly, what you'll find is that people can go into what we would call a detox kind of reaction, where their system starts to get more garbage collection going on. And when garbage collection goes on, the system is not usually very exciting and very, very happy, and usually more like the signal is to rest and to relax and to feel kind of not so great. And so that's why it's very important when you're using methylene blue to make sure that you are titrating the dose. Unless you have an acute issue, then that might be a different situation. But in general, you have like lower doses of methylene blue, like 4, 8, 16, 25 milligrams, which is really fantastic to support mitochondrial function. And then you have higher doses like 1 milligram up to 2 milligrams per kilogram, which can be great as an anti-infective. It can also be great as an abortive if you have like a traumatic event or ischemic event or like a low oxygen event. And like I have all my patients have the higher strength methylene blue in their medicine cabinets just in case. But if you don't have an acute issue and a chronic issue or a long-term goal, you really want to be titrating your dose to find out what's best for you. So what often happens, Elena, is that people will get methylene blue from a company and take way too much of it because they think they need to take their milligram per kilogram dosage of it. So instead of taking like 4 or 8 or 16 milligrams, they're taking 50 or 70 or even 100 milligrams the first go. That's not going to go well for people if they don't have an acute reason. Now, if you're an endurance athlete, I've been working with endurance athletes for a couple of years. One just did this Leadville race here in Colorado where I live, which is a 100-mile race. And we were giving him 36 milligrams of methylene blue, and we were giving him something called blue cannatine, which is another product that we have at my company, which contains methylene blue with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD, giving him a full troche of that every 4 hours. And he shaved 3 hours off of his race time from the year before. So you can do that, but I wouldn't recommend just doing that for a race, obviously. You have to practice and see what your dosing is going to be and how much support you need. So those are all really important factors. And another important factor, Elena, is that methylene blue is often contaminated with heavy metals. So you have to be very, very careful. Heavy metals like cadmium, mercury, arsenic, and lead. And so that's because of the manufacturing process on how you make methylene blue. And so we've had to throw out at Troscriptions, thousands of dollars worth of methylene blue in the past because it didn't meet our specifications. And so you have to be very careful where you're getting it from and making sure that that company is going to share with you their certificates of analysis. Now, at Troscriptions, what we do is that we get it already third-party tested, but then we test it again. So basically fourth-party testing or beyond the actual needing of testing that most people go. It's USP grade, which means it's pharmaceutical grade. And you'll find a lot of companies out there that say that they're USP grade, which is great, but you have to make sure that you're getting their certificates of analysis and see what their heavy metal content is. And so the other reason why your friend may have had this reaction, as it were, is in contaminated products. And even low amounts of lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic are not going to make you feel very good because it's going to have the opposite effect on your mitochondria than the methylene blue will. So that's why it's so important to get very, very pure stuff. You don't want to be drinking fish tank cleaner. That was a fun headline in the beginning of the pandemic. It's like biohackers drinking fish tank cleaner to reverse their age, which is funny, but fish tank cleaner does contain methylene blue. That is true, but I wouldn't recommend drinking fish tank cleaner at all because it's going to have all those impurities in it, right? So again, fancy headline. Make sure you get really pure stuff. Make sure you start with lower doses and titrate your dose slowly over time. Unless you have an acute issue, then more higher dosed methylene blue might be a better option. And typically that would be around 1 milligram to 2 milligrams per kilogram for more of an acute issue.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, very interesting. Thank you so much. So on that note, when we talk about longevity, what would be your other, let's say, top 2-3 supplements that you think that everyone should take for longevity? What are your favorite supplements to take, and what are you taking yourself?
Do we call it called exercise a supplement or no? It's funny with supplements. The way I think about them is a little bit different in the sense I think that there are some, ones that probably are pretty universal overall. But before I really think about like longevity supplements on their own, I think about what we do at Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, which is we test for what you need, and then we use what is required for your body to be function at optimal level. So I think what it comes down to is that we know that mitochondrial function is suffering terribly across the US, across the world. So my main initial direction when I work with patients is how can I support mitochondrial function? And that typically means looking at vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors, antioxidants, heavy metals, et cetera, that are going to be having some sort of impact on your ability to make energy. So we need to make energy. All of us need to make lots and lots of energy on a regular basis. It's like a ridiculous amount of ATP we make every day, our energy currency. We also have to be able to detox or be able to neutralize the stress that happens from when you make energy. So not only do you make carbon dioxide and water, everybody knows you breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide and water, but you also make these tiny little things called reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress. And so it's extremely important to make sure that you are neutralizing those on a regular basis. And you need some of it, for sure. This is all very important for signaling, for example. But if you have too much of it, the system is going to rust. It's going to start breaking down quicker. And it's really important that you have a neutralizing effect of that. So for me, I don't like to talk about like your top 3 or top 5 longevity supplements all that often, because I find that it really does sort of take the focus away from, in my perspective, looking at foundational health markers and optimizing there. Because, for example, I do a lot of, GI testing, gut testing, right? You have 80% of your immune system in your gut. And is your immune system kind of important? Yeah, right? If it's overactive, you get autoimmune problems. If you get underactive, you get issues with infection. If you have a gut that's not working very well, it's going to have a hard time preventing things from getting inside the system, right? So for me, it's really focused on the testing side of things and making sure that people are optimizing their vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors using foundational health markers. And all this sort of surrounds the area or the science of something called metabolomics, which is a science of looking at small molecules that are happening real time in your cells. And it's sort of the interaction between your genes and your environment in real time, looking at what's happening exogenously, so endogenous exposures like your food, like your microbes, like EMFs and cosmetics and pollutants, all that, along at the same time what's being transcribed from your DNA and how that's looking in your cells, and kind of looking at that all in real time. So that's the science of metabolomics, and it's the foundational module of the Home Hope certification for practitioners. And that's kind of what I focus most of my initial recommendations are. Now, if you were going to force me to give you some recommendations without looking at testing, I can do that too if you want. I'm happy to.
Yes, let's do that as well.
Okay, so the first thing that I have most of my patients taking is, if they don't have testing, is some sort of activated multivitamin, because most of us are vitamin deficient on some level. Our food, the nutritional quantity or quality of our food has gone down dramatically over the last several decades. And so even if you're eating animal foods, or especially if you're eating plant foods only, you're going to be vitamin deficient. So some sort of activated multivitamin, that typically is, what I mean by activated, I mean the activated forms of B12, B6, specifically B9, because those can be difficult for some people to activate. So I use a lot of activated multivitamins in my practice in people that don't have a good sense of what's going on under the hood. The second one I use a lot of these days is a little bit different than what most people would do. I use some sort of combination fatty acid oil, so omega-3, 6, and 9 together typically. I find that like most of us need a balanced ratio of those 3 fatty acids. And many people are just supplementing with omega-3. Many people are too overabundant on the omega-6 side, and getting the wrong types of omega-6s. So omega-3, 6, and 9 together can be a nice combination. So I almost
Do you
always
find this in one supplement, or?
Yeah. There's a number of companies that have a combination these days. So I usually use a combination unless I know like they're getting a significant amount of fish, or if they're getting a specific amount of olive oil or something like that, then use omega-3. So omega-9 is olive oil. So, but I find that that's a great way for people to get like a good balance of the 3, because most people think they just need omega-3s. They don't realize they need a balance of especially omega-3 and omega-6 together. So if you have too many omega-3s and too few omega-6s, you're actually going to cause inflammation and oxidative stress in the system. If you have too few omega-3s and omega-6s, we all kind of know about that story already for the most part, but that's
Yep.
what I commonly would do. So there's typically ratios in that one as well. I'll also use usually a fat-soluble vitamin combination, like something like vitamin A, D, E, and K, as I find that most of us are deficient in vitamin D, and also need to support K2 in that process, and then A and E as well. So if you're having a lot of omega-6 oils, for example, that are highly oxidized, vitamin E is very, very important to actually balance out your peroxidation there. So A, D, E, and K is very important for me. And then I also will use some sort of probiotic if I have to. If I don't know what's going on, it'll typically either be a spore-forming probiotic or it'll be a Lactobacillus bifidobacterium combination as well, because I find those are the most prevalent commensals, or the bugs in our stomach or in our intestines, excuse me, not in our stomach, our intestines, our large intestine. Remember that our stomach has very few bacteria in it. It shouldn't have very much at all. Our small intestine should have just a little bit. And our large intestine has the most, obviously has the most bacteria as well. The fuel for our small intestine, by the way, is glutamine, and the fuel for our large intestine is butyrate. So it's very important to have good sources of those in our diet, but I don't typically supplement with those directly. And then I'm trying to think of what else I would use. I'm not going to get all fancy for you, Elena. I'm not going to get all like these new fancy things like spermidine or methylene blue even. I mean, I think methylene blue is fantastic, and I still use it a lot in my patients, but I would not put it in sort of like my top 3 or 4. I think methylene blue, what it does is can help compensate for mitochondrial dysfunction and help really support the mitochondria very, very quickly while you're on the path to optimizing your health over the long term. And also, you can be using it more targeted for when you have more mitochondrial stress. So if you're on an airplane, if you're under bad lighting all the time, if you have relationship stress, if you're just not eating well for like a little while and you're going to get sick because you've been eating like shit again, then that's a good time to think about like using methylene blue as a targeted way of using it. And also, again, in the beginning of when you're really working with people, or you're working on your own health and trying to optimize it, it's a great way to start that process and rev it up and make it easier and smoother for you and for the people you're working with if you're a practitioner.
Yeah, that's great, actually. So I have a couple of comments on this one. I do share the same opinion that those supplements that you mentioned are actually one of the most essential ones for myself, because I do follow a largely animal-based diet. What I found is that my gut microbiome has actually adjusted. So I'm assuming that there is something that someone could call an imbalance in my gut, but actually for my diet, it's working pretty well, because I consume minimal fiber and I hardly consume any carbs at all. So with that in mind, the strains that are responsible for digesting fiber and carbs have like largely died out, probably in my intestines. Sure. What happens now is that I don't take commercial probiotics because I don't think they fit me anymore, and I'm not aware of a product that would be specifically targeted towards someone who's following a largely carnivore diet. And on that front, also, as you mentioned, a good quality multivitamin. So my favorite multivitamin is desiccated beef liver capsules. And I think that it's a wonderful supplement to take, and it's kind of in line with my nutrition as well. And I think it works great because, it's a natural product. It's not one of those cheap multivitamins that will color your pee yellow, and then, you just get to have like some expensive urine, and that's it. So it's like a very nice product. Like, what do you think of those points?
They're great points. I think a lot of it depends on what your diet's going to be and what you've chosen, right? So if you're a plant-based person, you're eating tons of fiber all the time, you better have bugs in your gut that can help you break down that, that fiber and help you do it. If you're on the carnivore side, I mean, there's really not a lot of great data here as far as what happens to carnivore guts and how this sort of works from a longevity and health perspective over the long term. I mean, we have a good sense, at least from the people that are doing it for long periods of time. They can have bowel movements every day, and they're not constipated for a week. So this is a good sign that you can, like you said, you can shift your gut microbiota in a way that can maintain healthy gut function. Yeah. A desiccated liver is great. I think you just have to make sure you're getting it from good sources, and that's obviously very important. And then
Yes.
what I do, Elena, over time is just test for things, right? You just kind of see how people are doing, look at their foundational, comprehensive laboratory testing, which I do with my clients, and we do at Home Hope, and that's kind of what you learn as a practitioner, and we have 7 modules specifically, but the first module is metabolomics. When you learn it, you learn that you want to test and retest every about 6 months to a year, at least when you're first starting, when you're making various interventions, changing the gut, and you're working on dietary changes and lifestyle and behavior and relationships, et cetera, et cetera. Then you can kind of see if what you're doing is working or if you need to make any modifications. So some people will do great doing various kinds of interventions. Other people will be like, we could have done better. Let's work on something else, right? Let's change your desiccated liver to some other supplement, or in addition to that, maybe you need something else because it's not giving you enough of fill in the blank, whatever it might be. So I don't like to do much guessing if I don't need to, in the sense of I like to be able to work with people in a way that allows us to follow them over time, see how they're doing, not only from a subjective way, but from an objective way as well.
Amazing. And then lastly, I believe I saw you talking about the importance of sleep as well in social media. And I believe that you might be having some supplements that you could recommend to our audience, whether from your own company or from another company as well. Because I think that, as you said, like when your relationships are not working, like your body will be suffering. When your food is crap, like your body will be suffering.
Right.
And it goes like that, right? So it's one of the fundamental pillars of our health, sleep. And I'm personally very strict with my sleep routine. I'm very consistent. I'm going to sleep at the same time every day. And, usually I dim all the lights at home after sunset, but today's an exception because we had to record this interview at this time.
I appreciate the exception. I understand.
Yeah, no problem. So what are your top tips for improving sleep?
Yeah. So what I think about here is what we call parasympathetic tone, right? Which is our body's ability to rest, digest, recover, and detoxify. And so most of us these days, especially in Western countries, but all across the world, are just go, go, go all the time. We're getting flooded with information. Our phone is giving us a dopamine hit every 3 seconds, and our brains just don't know how to shut down. And if we don't get good sleep, everything else suffers. Our immune system suffers, our hormones suffer, our relationships suffer, everything suffers. And so sleep is a big part of being able to rest, reset, and relax and digest and detoxify and all those kinds of things. And so it's a big part of turning off our sympathetic nervous system. So our sympathetic nervous system is our fight and flight nervous system. So it's our run away from the lion type of sympathetic nervous system. But of course, most of us aren't doing that. We're just stressed about our kids, about our families, about our holidays coming up and getting presents and our job and our relationships and everything else in between. And so how do we calm down? And so for me, a big emphasis, and for our company too at Troscriptions, a big emphasis is how can we shut off? How can we turn that switch off? Everybody knows how to turn the switch on these days. You could just drink some caffeine. You could do something to increase your sympathetic tone very easily. You could just be sleeping next to somebody who's snoring all night. That will also increase your sympathetic tone and not make you sleep very well. This is what we call a sleep divorce, everybody. If your partner is snoring, find another place to sleep or get them help so they're not snoring anymore. Okay. So
I think they can use some strips nowadays that they put on their nose.
I mean, it depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the situation. I mean, so if your partner is snoring, it could be as easily getting some strips, getting them a different type of pillow so that they don't sleep on their back, or it could be as significant as having obstructive sleep apnea and needing to get a mask or an appliance or something like that to help them sleep better in the evening. So, but if all that doesn't work, I think almost 1/2 of US couples don't sleep in the same bed anymore, interestingly enough. And a lot of that has to do with getting better sleep when they're not sleeping in the same bed with their partner. So just as a piece there. So when we're thinking about turning the switch off, how do you turn off? The neurotransmitter involved in that is something called GABA. GABA is our most important neurotransmitter in our brain that helps calm down the firing of our brain. And it's actually responsible for about 20% of your brain's neurotransmission. A lot of the other neurotransmitters get a lot more suppressed, like norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. But it actually is GABA, which kind of rules them all in various ways, because GABA is actually calming things down, and it actually is what's called a interneuron, I-N-T-E-R neuron, which means that it kind of stops the flow of information, so it can actually gate all the stuff that we're subject to on every second of every day. If we were actually observing and being able to process or trying to process all the information happening at all moments, we would be overwhelmed very significantly. So if you can enhance the GABA system, you can enhance the capacity of our brain to shut down and to relax. And so when you want to sleep, you need to be enhancing GABA in the capacity that you're able to keep yourself fall asleep and also maintain your sleep as well. So GABA is great, but you can't take it as a supplement, because GABA supplements do not work. Unfortunately, GABA supplements don't get across the blood-brain barrier, which is the barrier that prevents things from getting into the brain. It's too big of a molecule. And so if you take GABA supplements and they work, this is often a indicator that you might have a brain barrier that's leaky, or a leaky brain, and also a leaky gut that often goes along with this. So this is significant and often happens in people that have chronic inflammatory issues, gut issues, lots of stress, infections, and things like that. And so GABA supplements don't work typically, but they can work in those capacities. It's almost diagnostic in those ways. So what we do at Troscriptions is enhance the GABA receptor in various ways by not giving GABA directly, but giving things that enhance the GABA receptor itself. There are things that bind to the GABA receptor where GABA would bind, and there's also things that can bind to the GABA receptor in other areas of that receptor that enhance the capacity for GABA to bind. That's called an allosteric modulator specifically. The things that are not GABA that bind to the site where GABA would bind on the receptor, that's called an orthosteric ligand. Those are just fancy words. But what we do is we use a combination of something that's going to bind to the site where GABA would bind, and also something that would bind to this allosteric site at the same time. So that combination is very, very powerful for enhancing GABA tone. And so we use things like kava, CBD, and CBG in our what's called our TROCOM formula. Those are allosteric binding, so they're binding to a site not at the GABA receptor itself, not on the GABA site, but like a different site on the GABA receptor, so enhancing the amount of GABA that would bind. And then we're using something called nicotinyl GABA as well. Nicotinyl GABA is a vitamin B3 attached to a GABA, and that allows GABA to get through because vitamin B3 can get it through, and then it kind of brings GABA along with it. And vitamin B3 and GABA will increase the amount of GABA in the brain by binding directly to the GABA site, along with vitamin B3, which is mildly activating. So you can take TROCOM during the day for stress relief, for relaxation, to calm down your nervous system without feeling very tired, which is fantastic. And then we have something called TROZ, which is our sleep formula. This one specifically has some of these allosteric binding to the GABA receptor, something called honokiol or honokiol is the other way it's called, from magnolia bark. And that's fantastic because it works to increase the amount of GABA that binds. But in addition to that, we have something called agarine. Agarine is from the psychedelic mushroom Amanita muscaria. This is not a psychedelic compound, though, especially at low doses. But the Amanita mushroom is a very famous mushroom, and it's a red cap. It's got white spots. It's very famous in Christmas mythology, Santa Claus, reindeer, flying reindeer, and psychedelic experiences, and drinking reindeer urine, and all these kinds of things, which we could get into maybe another time. But the cool thing about this agarine is it's a long-acting modulator. It binds in the GABA receptor where GABA would bind. And so that combination of those two things together can be very, very powerful to help you relax and to help you sleep. And TROZ also has 6 other ingredients in there that are also modulating sleep in various ways, which can be very, very powerful. So for me, though, like what it comes down to, Elena, is that enhancing the GABA system is very, very important. But if you're looking at other supplements that might be helpful, there are many of them. Personally, what I will take is some magnesium at night, because many of us are magnesium deficient, and also magnesium helps with relaxation and vasodilation. Also, I take some collagen at night because it has an amino acid specifically called glycine. Glycine is one of it's actually our most prevalent amino acid in the body, and also it's also working on inhibiting neurotransmitter activation at night as well. So those are common ones for me and a lot of my patients.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for this. So just to wrap up, I wanted to ask you, where can people find out more about your products and yourself? Maybe you can give us some social media links as well. And also, do you ship worldwide? Because, for example, I would love to try out some of your Methylene Blue. I've never tried Methylene Blue before,
Sure.
so I'm very curious. But I'm currently spending the winter in Dubai, so I was wondering if it would be possible to ship it over here.
It sounds like it'd be a lovely time to spend some time in Dubai. Right now, our worldwide, we only have distribution in the UK, in the US, and in Australia at this point. There are some other countries that we do kind of on a case by case basis, but unfortunately, we can't get to Dubai at this point. I apologize for that.
All right,
Um,
that's
but
very
yeah,
disappointing.
I know, it's a challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
there's lots
moved
of
here for
regulations when it
work
comes down to it.
because yeah, our company has expanded over here in the Middle East, so we're selling our supplements here and as their pharmacies, and completely
That's
different
great.
product range than yours. But
Maybe
the
you and I
reason,
need to talk though. We need to figure out how
yeah,
we can
yeah,
get our stuff over there.
absolutely.
Yeah,
That's the reason why I wanted to have this chat with you, because I found your product line fascinating, very different than mine, and very,
right.
specialized as well. So perhaps we can also record another interview another time. I know that we're kind of running out of time right now.
No, it's all good. That sounds great. If if you want to learn more about our products, our company is called Troscriptions. The word troche and prescriptions kind of mashed up, so it's Troscriptions. It's at troscriptions.com. You can find us on Instagram at Troscriptions as well. On our website, we have lots of blogs, lots of articles on the products, on all things that we discussed here. Everything Methylene Blue, all of our different products as well, for sleep, for stress. We didn't talk about our ones for energy very much. Where our blue cannatine, which is our combination with Methylene Blue and nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. But if you really want focus, flow, and energy, that's a fantastic product to get you going in the morning or anytime you need it. And you can also go to my personal Instagram. It's at Dr. Scott Sherr, DrScottSherr. And yeah, I think those are the major places to go. Oh, and also the nonprofit Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. If you are a practitioner, whether licensed or non-licensed, working with clients and want to learn how to use metabolomics and a foundational approach to optimize the health of your patients and clients, go check out homehope.org for more information for our 7-module certification system. And depending on when this goes out, we do have a symposium in Vegas in December 11th and 12th at Caesar's Palace, which is going to be right before this other anti-aging conference called A4M in Las Vegas, which happens every year. So we're going to have about 12 or 14 speakers, CME credits, and we're going to have a 2-day event for those that are interested in learning more about what we do, and also some fantastic speakers across the health spectrum, which you can check out at homehope.org as well.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Dr. Scott. And thank you for being on the channel. And we'll see you soon. Bye bye.
Thanks for your time.
Okay. Okay.